Hello, I'm Jessie, and welcome back to the Happiness Hippi podcast. There is an idea at the center of today's conversation that sounds almost frustratingly simple when you first hear it. Most people already know, at least intellectually, what tends to support a happier and steadier life. Presence helps, gratitude helps, meaningful connection helps, rest helps. Honesty helps. Yet knowing those things and consistently living them are clearly not the same thing. The essay we are exploring today is called Why Happiness is Simple but Not Easy, Understanding the Challenge, and it looks at the gap between understanding what matters and actually building a life around it. I am joined by the Happiness Hippie, who is the author of the essay.
It's good to be here with you again, Jessie. And I think that gap between understanding and embodiment is where many people quietly struggle. Because if we are honest, most adults already possess a surprising amount of insight about what improves their lives and what damages them. They know constant comparison drains them. They know resentment keeps them tense. They know sleep matters, relationships matter, and attention matters. Yet people still find themselves pulled toward habits and patterns that work against their own well-being.
Which means the real problem is not usually a lack of information.
Exactly. Modern culture often treats happiness as though it's hidden behind some secret method or complicated philosophy. But most of the core principles are actually straightforward. The difficulty is repetition. The difficulty is consistency. The difficulty is choosing presence over distraction for the 1,000th time, not the first time. That is why the essay makes a distinction between simple and easy. Simple means understandable. Easy means effortless. Those are very different things.
The image of the uphill path in the essay captures that well. The path is clearly marked. You can see where you're meant to go, but you still have to climb it.
And people often underestimate how much energy that climb requires because modern life constantly fragments attention. A person may genuinely want a calmer and more grounded life, but they are also carrying stress, old conditioning, financial pressure, unresolved emotions, endless digital input, and habits built over decades. So even when the direction is clear, movement feels difficult. That does not mean the path is wrong. It means human beings are complicated.
There is also something almost relieving in hearing that happiness is not an achievement you secure permanently, because people often approach personal growth as though they are trying to arrive somewhere once and for all.
Yes, and that mindset creates unnecessary frustration. People think they should eventually become permanently peaceful, permanently disciplined, permanently emotionally regulated. But life does not operate that way. Happiness is not a fixed emotional state that you capture and hold forever. It's more like a relationship with your own inner life. And relationships require maintenance, attention, and repair. That is why the essay describes happiness as a journey rather than an achievement.
I think many listeners will recognize that in practical ways. You can have months where you feel grounded and present, and then suddenly life changes. Stress returns, grief appears, routines collapse, and you feel as though you have lost progress.
Precisely, but that does not necessarily mean progress vanished. It may simply mean your practices were tested under heavier conditions. One of the more important sections in the essay is the idea that inner progress is often invisible while it's happening. Someone may not feel dramatically transformed, but perhaps they recover from setbacks more quickly than before. Perhaps they pause before reacting instead of exploding immediately. Perhaps they speak to themselves with less cruelty under pressure. Those shifts matter enormously, even if they are subtle.
That part stood out to me because modern culture conditions people to expect visible metrics for everything. If you exercise, there are physical changes. If you save money, there is a bank balance. But emotional growth often develops underground for a long time before you notice anything externally.
That is exactly right. The essay compares it to roots developing beneath soil before anything becomes visible above ground. And because of that invisibility, people sometimes abandon practices too early. They assume nothing is happening because nothing dramatic has occurred. But inner work accumulates quietly through repetition. Attention changes first, then reactions shift, then habits soften. Eventually, identity itself begins to change.
There is another important tension in the essay, which is the role of the ego, because people often imagine happiness as adding pleasant experiences. But the essay argues that happiness frequently requires letting go of certain impulses instead.
Yes, the ego complicates things because it seeks protection, certainty, admiration, and control. And many of the choices that support deeper well-being directly challenge those impulses. Forgiveness challenges pride. Presence challenges distraction. Humility challenges the need to always appear right or superior. The ego prefers blame because blame protects identity. The heart often prefers release because release restores peace. That tension is very real in everyday life.
And it shows up in ordinary moments, not just dramatic philosophical ones. You can see it during arguments, at work, in relationships. Someone wants to apologize, but pride interferes. Someone knows rest would help, but guilt keeps them working. Someone wants honesty, but fear of judgment keeps them performing.
Exactly, Jesse, which is why happiness is not merely emotional. It is behavioral and relational. It is built through repeated decisions about how you engage with yourself and others. And that is also why difficult circumstances do not automatically erase happiness. The essay is very clear that adversity is part of life. No emotionally healthy person is happy all the time. Grief exists, illness exists, rejection exists. The goal is not to pretend those realities are pleasant. The goal is resilience.
That distinction matters because some modern self-help language almost implies that sadness itself is failure.
Which is deeply unhelpful. Human beings are not machines designed for uninterrupted positivity. Emotional range is part of being alive. The healthier question is not, can I avoid pain forever? But how do I relate to pain when it arrives? Resilience means remaining connected to yourself even during difficult periods. It means understanding that hardship is not proof you are broken.
The practical section in the essay helps ground all of this because otherwise these conversations can become abstract very quickly. You include 5 practices that support the process: daily stillness, journaling, meaningful connection, gratitude, and what you call micro acts of joy.
And notice how ordinary those practices are. That is important. People often search for dramatic transformation while ignoring simple stabilizing habits. But a few minutes of stillness every day changes attention over time. Journaling reveals patterns that stay hidden when thoughts remain unexamined. Meaningful connection regulates the nervous system in ways isolation cannot. And micro acts of joy matter because life is not only built from major milestones. A familiar song, warm coffee, morning light through a window, a good conversation. Those moments train attention towards life rather than constant dissatisfaction.
The phrase micro acts of joy feels especially useful because it lowers the threshold psychologically. A lot of people think happiness must arrive in large, dramatic waves. But in reality, many meaningful lives are built from small, repeated experiences of steadiness and appreciation.
Yes, and that perspective protects people from constantly postponing joy. If happiness only counts when it is spectacular, most of life starts feeling insufficient. But when attention becomes more refined, ordinary moments begin carrying more emotional weight. You stop overlooking life while waiting for life.
The journaling prompts in the essay move beyond surface positivity. They ask things like where you chose fear over presence, or what you avoided that may have supported growth.
Because honest reflection matters more than performance. The goal of those prompts is not self-criticism, it is awareness. Growth requires visibility. You cannot shift patterns you refuse to examine. And one of the most important sections in the piece comes afterwards, where obstacles are reframed as teachers rather than proof of failure.
That changes the emotional tone of setbacks completely, because many people experience difficulty and immediately conclude they are doing something wrong or that growth isn't working.
Exactly. But resistance often contains information. Returning to old habits may reveal where care is still needed. Feeling emotionally reactive may reveal exhaustion or unresolved pain. Struggle itself is not the enemy. The essay says something important there. Pain is information, not punishment. Once people understand that, they stop treating every difficult moment as evidence of personal failure.
Toward the end, the essay becomes more direct about responsibility. There are no shortcuts, no hidden formula. Presence, honesty, and repetition do the work.
And I think that honesty is actually liberating, because if happiness depended on secret knowledge or extraordinary circumstances, most people would feel powerless. But if happiness depends largely on repeated small choices, then agency returns. Not total control, because life will always remain unpredictable, but meaningful agency. You can choose how you speak. You can choose whether you rest. You can choose whether you return attention to what matters. Those choices accumulate.
The Martha Washington quote at the end supports that beautifully. The reminder that much of happiness depends on disposition rather than circumstances.
Indeed, and disposition is not fixed. That is another important point. People sometimes hear statements like that and assume they either have the right disposition or they do not. But disposition is shaped through repeated practice, attention, interpretation, and behavior. You cultivate it gradually.
Which brings us back to the central idea of the whole discussion. Happiness is understandable, but living it consistently takes effort, patience, and willingness to return again and again. And perhaps that is actually encouraging, because it removes the fantasy that anyone else has completely solved life while you alone are struggling.
That is exactly it. Everyone is practicing. Everyone is learning how to meet themselves more honestly. Everyone loses focus and has to begin again. The important thing is not perfection, it is participation. The willingness to keep returning to the path even when progress feels slow or invisible. And over time, those ordinary repeated acts begin shaping something remarkably stable. Not a perfect life, but a more grounded one.
And maybe that's the real shift. Realizing happiness isn't hiding somewhere far away waiting to be discovered. It's built gradually through attention, honesty, steadiness, and the willingness to continue showing up for your own life. If today's conversation resonated and you want more perspective on emotional clarity or meaningful living, begin at the Hour Approach cage at happinesshippie.com. And please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for being part of this community. We'll talk again soon.